Welcome to the Invention Stories Podcast, where we share stories of inventors who turn their idea into a product. Please visit our website at www.inventionstories.com. And now, from the Invention Stories Podcast World Headquarters Studios in Morro Bay, California, is our host, Robert Baer.
Welcome to the Invention Stories Podcast, brought to you by the Socket Saver. My name is Robert Baer, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to episode 39, our interview with Louise White, a freelance designer inventor at Me First Designs, Inc. I seem to speak often with inventors who have an idea for a new toy, and others who have shared with me their interest in being a freelance inventor. Louise White is an award-winning industrial designer who specializes in both plush and plastic toys and has worked with companies such as Toys R Us, Ohio Arts, and Goody Products, just to name a few. And I believe she'll share some great insight. We have Louise White on the line from New York City, so let's get started. Hello, Louise. Great to have you with us on the Invention Stories Podcast. I want to ask you, I guess you see the news. It looks like Toys R Us, one of your partners there, they seem to be struggling. That certainly caught me off guard.
Didn't catch me off guard because I've been involved in Women in Toys, and we had an event at Toys R Us about a year ago. So I connected with a bunch of, the head, and I had some kitchen toys. So I basically said, hey, let me come and show you some concepts. So I ended up going, and that day I went, hundreds of people were fired. Couldn't have been the worst timing.
Wow.
It's like, hi, I have ideas for you. They're like, my boss was fired, people under me were fired. So it's not news, and it's been all over LinkedIn that I think they overextended themselves. Fire. I think the people that owned it, I think they owed a lot of money and they never paid it. But also the truth is, I think it's also the way things are now, like Amazon is like 40% of toys. So.
Well, it seems like something like plush, for example, I would think that'd have to be like hands-on for it to be a real turn-on for a kid. To look at something that that is sort of something that's lovable and squeezable, that you'd want to have your hands on it.
You know what it is? Everyone says, oh, toys are going down. No, they're not. It's just a different way of getting it to the customer. I think Toys R Us will regroup. I think they also lost a lot of money when they acquired a bunch of, I think they bailed out FAO, and, they ended up with the American Girl doll sections that did not do well. And I think a lot of their stuff, they really pared down to just a couple of companies. When I showed them some concepts, they really weren't into innovation. I mean, they really just wanted the same. So as I say, you really need to be competitive, and Toys R Us really needs to be revamped to be a little bit more competitive, to offer unusual things, not the same things that you can get on Amazon for cheaper.
All right. Okay. Well, Louise, I always try to find as much as I can about the person before I talk to them. It just helps me feel better. And I always go on YouTube because I want to see if somebody's made videos. There's a whole lot of Louise Whites, and one of you Louise Whites won the Powerball.
It was not me. I'm also, apparently, I had an Asian client who told me that Louise the lobster they found was like a 120-year-old lobster. I'm like, okay, it's not me. I was not found at some sushi bar.
Okay.
But yeah, I did. What happened was I realized I was looking up your name, that you contacted me years ago. I think we were going to do an article. I don't remember what happened, but I did a podcast recently for somebody, so I now am familiar with the whole process of doing a podcast. I guess before I was kind of like, let me see what it is. And I also did a class for this Chinese company, which was very interesting. I had to do a 45-minute class taped, and as I did it, they're like, oh, can you do a transcript? I'm like, are you kidding me? That's a lot of work to transcribe what I just said. So they have to change it to obviously a language that their viewers will understand. So I have a little more experience than I did guess in 2014 when you were contacting me. So
Yeah, back then we were just sharing the stories. What I either did at that time was ask you to write it, or I would interview you over the phone and record it, and then I'd write it myself. But what I found was that too much is missing from listening to the person speak versus reading it off the page. And I totally get why podcasts are exploding right now. It's because, well, you can put them on while you're going to work or doing other things. But I kind of wanted to start off at the beginning there. What kind of kid were you? Were you a daydreamer? Were you an artist? Did you like toy? I mean, what kind of kid were you?
So when I was growing up, I always wanted to be an artist. And my parents, I come from my grandfather who I was named after was an artist. And my mom dabbled in it a little, but ended up, my parents have a special ed preschool. So when I told them I wanted to be an artist, my dad was like, no. He said, I'm not having a starving artist as a daughter. And so when I got to college, I said, I want to be an artist. And my dad's like, well, prove it to me. Write me an essay. Because, my parents are originally teachers. So, of course, I'm not writing you an essay. But then I found out about industrial design. And when I explained to him, my dad was totally on board. So I went to Pratt, and he would drive me back and forth. It was back in the day where it was in a bad part of Brooklyn. Now it's like, oh my God, you go to Pratt and you're like, this is so amazing. But then it was like you couldn't leave the gate because you were going to get robbed or something. And so my dad would drive me back and forth, and we would go over all the projects. Like we have to do a 3-legged stool, a bow saw that's collapsible, and things like that. Actually, it was a 1-legged stool. Sorry, it wasn't a 3-legged. That would make sense. And so what's funny is that today I actually do a lot of invention with my dad. I'll come up with an idea. My dad will help me with models, and because he's got an engineer mind. So it's always kind of been in the family, but I pursued it because I'm stubborn and I don't quit. So that's why I'm a toy designer today.
Okay. You said it was in Brooklyn, the Pratt Institute, where you live in New York City or something as a kid?
So I might as well have been living in California, because going from Staten Island, which is where I'm born, to Brooklyn in the morning is such a hard commute. It is the bridge does not move. I'm sure you're familiar with probably LA traffic or something, but it's similar. Horrible. So yeah, so I grew up in Staten Island, small town, and when I was doing product design at Pratt, I ended up putting a smiley face on almost everything. So it was just a natural fit that I would be a toy designer. And my parents also, they're big collectors of antique toys. So they have a whole entire wall of just antique toys. And in their school, they have a wall of my stuff along with the antique toys. So it's kind of just been there, and I just had to figure out a way to monetize it.
Oh, there you go. That's the difference between a hobby and earning a living is how to monetize it. So you always had a passion for it. Why did you pick the Pratt Institute as the school to go to? Why not any other school? Did you always kind of lock in on that, maybe even at an early age?
No, to be honest with you, it's such a crazy, I was at Queens College for 2 years and did not know what I wanted to do. I took some architecture class at College of Staten Island just because I said, oh, maybe I'll be an architect. And then I took a class and I'm like, no, it is not for me. And everyone discouraged me from being an architect. They're like, there's no money. I actually even read an article that said they make the least amount, but you need to be really smart and you need this really hard test, but they make it so hard to be creative in that field. So I was in the cafeteria, and this guy that I knew said to me, my sister's an industrial designer at Pratt Institute. So I quickly, in those days, I don't know, Google wasn't as much as it is today. And so I did my research, and I said to my parents, I want to go to Pratt. And my dad was like, okay. And so I went. I didn't know anything. Those days, there was only 2 schools, maybe 3 in my area that I could drive to. And, obviously RISD and all those are too far because they wanted me to stay home. But there was FIT, Pratt. I think that was pretty much the only 2 at the time. Now I have a 15-year-old, and she took a Thinking Creatively class in university. They have architecture and they have industrial design. And so she took a course where she actually learned all the different disciplines within design, because of course naturally I end up with a daughter and who's creative. And so now there's like Montclair is industrial design and Kane. But when I was looking at schools, there's very few.
When you were a kid and you were looking at toys, I know you said you're creative. I don't want to put your words in your mouth, but do you look at things, or did you look at things and say, I can make this better by doing this or adding this functionality or changing it like this? Or did you?
Always. I still do. I've always, my biggest positive as a designer happens to be I'm a problem solver. I'll go to the hairdresser and my head hurts from leaning back, and this is one day I'm going to do this. I said, I'm going to make something that like cushions your head better so you don't get a headache when you're getting your hair washed. Or like, I'm so sick of my garbage cans like being upside down from the garbage man. I'm going to come up with something. So I'm always like, no matter where I am and what I do, I'm always a problem solver. So how I ended up in kid toy design was I took a toy book, and I went through literally went through A to Z, and I called up company after company. I went through my toys, looked at the labels, and I ended up calling a company called Prestige Toy, and they said, come on down. And I had a job at the time working in textile, even though that really wasn't my field. And he said, you want to freelance? So I did a couple of toys, and he taught me. I ended up working in-house for about a year and a half, and then I worked in another company, plastic toy company that doesn't exist anymore. And I learned a lot of the computer programs. But my biggest thing that I love to do now is not so much, I love design, but I really like to solve a problem. So every time, I have 3 kids, I observe them and I write down. Now I take videos of problems that I have a 4-year-old, that's my youngest. So I used to take videos when she was little. I don't even have enough time to actually create as many products ideas that I have in my head right now. I have so many ideas, because you do some work that, it's like freelance, people pay you to do design work or invention, and I'm focusing a little bit more on my invention business. I'm really good working for myself. I always have been. I'm not an office person. I worked in office for 2 jobs, and I've been a freelancer ever since. So I like the variety. A lot of times big companies will come to me and say, we need a line, and I'll do the line, and then they're like, we got it from there. Because it's obviously, they want someone to start them up, but then they take it in-house where it's probably cheaper, or they have a little more control to do the rest. So sometimes I'll work in a company and I'll work a project once a year. Sometimes I'll work for 6 months straight. But the industry changes a lot. So sometimes you'll work with somebody and then they're gone. So when they're gone, you're gone, because the new person that comes in will hire their own freelancers. So that could be why. Like, for example, kids too, I actually worked years and years ago, and then it worked years later. So someone will reach out to me and say, hey, same company, different design director.
Yeah. And I can imagine that makes a huge difference. I've been in cultures where the top person changes and it turns from being a great place into a crappy place to work and vice versa. So, yeah, I could see that. Sometimes people come in new and they want to have their own people below them, and they feel threatened or whatever by somebody especially somebody who's got talent.
You know what? And I think that's the negative and positive about being a freelancer, because when you're in-house, people see you. And when you're not, you might get somebody that's in-house that they want to be the number one, so they might shoot down your idea or be negative for that because they want to shine. So when you're not in-house, there's no face to it. But I think technology, I've been doing a lot more, like a Google Hangout, so I see more people. I've been getting more involved by going to different events, and I've partnered up with a bunch of people, which I really love doing, because I think partnering up, like you got 2 people with the same goal, and in ways they have ideas and you have ideas, and your end product is going to be amazing. Versus, you're on your own and you're in a little bubble, and it seems okay, but it's just you. So I really like working with other people. One of my partners does the sales end, so I'll do the invention, and then she'll do the sales part, which just takes that part off. for me, I could focus on the invention and the design.
What about the sales part? How do you feel about sales? Is it like your least favorite thing to do, or are you?
It's not. I don't mind it. I love going to meetings. I've gone to meetings. I used to go to Toys R Us. Just me, myself, and I in one meeting, and then I look over and there was like a whole room full of people from Mattel. So I always felt kind of cool, like, hey, I could do this. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's better, somebody who has the ins, who has those type of connections, because sometimes that's really what it comes down to. And also some companies, of course, take your ideas if you're by yourself versus with a partner who has a good relationship. So I think it's always better to have someone handle that aspect if you can.
So as a freelancer,
but I have no problem selling.
Okay, so as a freelancer, how do you protect yourself when people call you in for sort of a consultation or a meeting? And I mean, does it ever happen where they just listen to you and you think you're getting a job and then they pass on you and next thing you know, you see a lot of what you were talking about in a product?
It happened to me more, I would say, a couple of years ago than it does today, because I partnered up with people that have better relationships with the sales people. But it happened to me a lot, which is why I reached out to get people to partner with. I've gone into a store and sold my product and went back to the company and they're like, and we have lawyers. They don't care. I actually once quoted an article about that because somebody was suing one of the big companies, and the whole article was about, like, how do you protect yourself? Because if you're, an inventor, they know you're individual. They know you're not going to spend millions of dollars to protect your property. I have some patents on some things. That's one way of protecting yourself. I have provisional patents and then see if there's an interest, and then I'll go for the full patent. At the end of the day, sometimes you just have to let it go because you don't want to dwell in the negative. You want to just keep going. And for someone like myself, I have so many ideas. It's not the end of the world if I lose one concept. I don't like it. I think it's bad for the company because companies do get reputations. Certain companies I won't show concepts to. In one particular, I wouldn't show for years, even though people would come to me from that company saying, hey, we're looking for a designer, I wouldn't go back to them because I didn't like that idea that they would just take my concept. But at the end of the day, you develop good relationships with quality companies, and those are the ones that you end up showing your number one ideas to first.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I wanted to ask you about the Goody Newell Rubbermaid company.
I actually loved it because, I'm a girl, so I guess I love hair accessories. And at the time, when I worked there, I had a baby, and so, I was always thinking of different ways to do her hair. So that was fun. I basically did a line for them of innovative ways for hair accessories. So to me, it doesn't matter what the job is. It's always the same. How do you come up with something unique and different that solves a problem? And the person I worked with left, sadly, but I did get a bunch of hair accessories out of it, so that was fun. Yeah, so that was my short stint in working with Goody while the person was there, and then she moved on. It happened in the beginning a lot. Someone would just leave, and then they didn't ask you to continue because there was a new person.
That must have been heartbreaking, but sometimes things change and you just don't want to leave, but then they say, hey, there's the door and whatever, and then other times you just can't wait to leave because you figure, these clowns are not listening. Is it anything like that where, people aren't really listening to you or they're overruling your designs and it's making it no fun for you? What, am I striking a chord?
No, I'll be honest with you, that's what's amazing about being a freelancer is that you do your part, and more than likely, you don't work the other part where it's with the in-house back and forth, let's change this. And you hope at the end of the day that your product, the integrity of the product is there. But when I used to work in-house, I remember getting into, I was younger, of course, and you care more about that stuff. As you get older, you're kind of at the end of the day, if my product does well and it's a better product and I get a higher royalty because it's a better product, I don't really care. I'm not too hung up on that kind of stuff. But obviously, if a product doesn't work as well as it should, it's kind of frustrating. So as a freelancer, when you're getting royalty, you kind of want to be more involved. But not every company will have you involved because there's so many people, so many levels. But I've had clients that I passed over to other people one used to call me all hours of the night and day, and it was so different. This was years ago, when you're just learning how to create boundaries. So, but the person I passed to still works with that person, so I guess if they were a better fit, I just couldn't work with that person. She was a little out there.
Okay. She cared a little too much, huh?
You know what? I work with a lot of individuals that don't have any experience, and they're usually my favorite client because they're open to things. Sometimes not so much if they're invested like in a patent and they're kind of painting themselves into this box, but generally they're a little bit more open, and I love helping those type of people out with my experience. With companies that are larger, sometimes you don't have as much say because they have about 10 people that have decided the direction, and you're here to, like, I guess, give them a good output, but you don't have as much leverage or as much say. So it really depends.
And now it's time for a commercial break. The Invention Stories Podcast is brought to you by the Socket Saver. Do the plugs fall out of your wall sockets? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. No repairs necessary, no circuit breakers involved, no electrical knowledge or mechanical skills required. Socket Savers are inexpensive, efficient, and portable. For more information, please visit www.socketsaver.com. So you were talking about royalties. Are a lot of your contracts or a lot of your partnerships, are they royalty agreements? Do you get a base and then a percentage of the sales, or?
Well, I mean, there's several ways to work. When I started out, it was only design fees. You know, you create it, you make your fee, and then, if it did amazing, you wouldn't get anything from it. I would say in the early 2000s, people were much more willing to give a royalty if it was an invention or a really cool product. And then over the years, people have been less likely to give a royalty or a bigger royalty because I guess the margins are much tighter. So that's why I've been focusing more on my inventions. I've been working more with engineers and really trying to find that innovative toy, but keeping it simple for babies. So it really depends. There are companies that will only give a royalty, and it's a big chance because if it doesn't go to market, you're making nothing. And I've had that before. So sometimes what I'll ask for, most of the time I'll ask for an advance against royalty. So they give you a certain amount of money, and then when the royalty starts, they'll deduct that. And then once you've reached that advance, then you start getting the royalty. But I had this one product called Little Shoppers, and it was in the market, I think, 2005 until last year. So I was getting royalties every quarter for it. So
nice.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Okay, I was going to ask if you were getting royalties for something that you had created back in the 1900s or the 2000s. So.
No, I wish.
Okay.
But I've been definitely trying to focus more on that because long term, having several items, different companies with a certain percentage, obviously is where the money's at. When you just sell your idea, that's it. I also think that there's a little bit more investment. As a designer and inventor, if you're getting a royalty, you'll put your heart and soul into it more than if you're just designing it because you care about the outcome. So I think a lot of times companies are like, oh, we don't want to give you, we don't have any to give, but they don't understand if they give even just 3% to an inventor, you will get 1,000 times more of the soul of the inventor versus just giving them a flat fee.
I didn't realize that. I didn't know if you just gave your 100% no matter what, but I can see.
No, you give your 100%, but you give 1,000% if you know that you're invested in the outcome. Companies don't exactly have so much money these days to hand you a high design fee. Look, the economy is getting a little better, but I would say for years it was a struggle. So you want to get that job, and then you have a lot of people that are overseas that will basically work for nothing, and that's a problem. So sometimes as a designer with the internet, and there's so many people out there looking for work, the fees go lower, 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 and then you're doing it for nothing. And so you want to put your 100% in, but it's like you're feeling like you're being taken advantage of in a way. So when you get a royalty, even if you're getting a small advance, you know that you might, if it's a success, it will pay off. So.
What is, like, let's say, okay, I'm a toy company or just somebody who wants to create something and I contact you. What is, like, your dream phone call? What would make you hang up and do a little dance? Would it, like, what do you think would be just perfect for you?
Oh, when I get a phone call from one of my partners that a company decided to go into a royalty agreement, which just happened recently. We showed them 3 concepts. They said they're taking 3 concepts. That was the best. That makes you so happy. And, you know, obviously then you have to do a contract and all that, but that's the best is knowing that, like, what you show them is what they're looking for. But obviously there's other situations. Like, I had recently a company contact me that they're looking for somebody to do a whole line for them, especially in license. Like, let's say I've done Winnie the Pooh, so they're looking for a whole line. I love doing that. From A to Z, that's, like, fun. And I really enjoy doing that.
What do you mean a whole line?
If, let's say it's a baby toy line, so I'll do everything from, like, rattle to activity toys to books to playmat, the whole line. They give me, like, a style guide, and I have to create, like, 15 to 20 products for them. I really enjoy doing that because, like, you're getting, like, a certain amount of control over the look of the line.
Well, like for Winnie the Pooh, for example, don't they already have Winnie the Pooh look and all that already, like? Yeah,
so, of course, yeah. I happen to like doing licensed stuff just because, especially if I like the license. I mean, I've worked with licenses that are not as cute, and it's harder to create a line. I still make great products, but it's always helps when you love the license. Like, I love Disney. My favorite was always Hello Kitty, because I guess that's where I grew up, and I had, like, a Sanrio store in my mall. And so when I was doing Hello Kitty toys, I love doing that just because I think they're so cute. And I like to come up with, like, innovative ways to apply the license. But, I mean, I've had other clients that say, hey, we don't have a style guide. You know, we need you to create one. So what I do is I start with, I ask my client, what is the look that you're looking for? Email me links of different looks that you like. And then I'll create some characters and color palette, and I'll do some research, and I'll give you, like, what is out there to start. And then we can start from there. I don't want to, if a client has in mind a very classic look, I don't want to create very modern characters. So I really need to understand and get in their head what is it that they're looking for.
That sounds important to be on the same page, less time being wasted. I want to ask you, just as a person trying to earn a living, especially a young person with children, how does being a sort of a freelancer, how does that work for you? Do you ever get, like, nervous if you don't get a job right away? Do you try to save a certain amount in the bank, or?
It's like my son is trying out for hockey today, and my son is, like, 11, and he's, like, a big gamer. He's not a sports person. My husband he's from Canada, so he's, like, a hockey fan, and my son never was really into sports. So he's trying out for hockey, and while I think he has great shots, I worry if he's a hustler, because he's not. He is a very sweet, very studious, very analytical. Like, I think he's going to be my future toy designer with me. And I actually pick his brain a lot. He's, like, into Pokemon and all that stuff. But anyway, that is the same thing as being a freelancer. Is you have to be a hustler. If, you know, there are times when you get a phone call and they're like, oh, yeah, this company was not interested, and that company's not interested. And it can be really make you feel bad. You know, is the concept not good? But I find, since I've been doing this for a while, that sometimes it's just not your product. It could be your product. You know, you never know. Maybe it's a bad idea. But if you think in your heart that it's a good idea, maybe it needs a little fine-tuning, but could just be not a good fit. So you have to, like, sort of pump yourself back up. So what I'll do is I will reach out to a bunch of people, and I'll say, hey, do you want me to show you concepts? And it sort of gets you back on track when you get a little bit of activity. The worst thing for a freelancer or a designer is to sort of just kind of get lazy and just fall into the same clients, because, as I told you before, a lot of times the clients end. They go out of business, they switch jobs. You can't just stay stagnant. You got to constantly have things in the pipeline and keep going forward. And save, definitely.
Yeah, no, that sounds like good advice. You know, yeah, I mean, especially if you're getting, I don't want to say fat on like, but if you're getting comfortable with a specific client, I've heard of lawyers doing this where they just get comfortable and then that client leaves and they're like, wow, all of a sudden that's 3/4 of their business gone because they weren't always just continuing to solicit. And it sounds like in the toy business, things can change pretty quick on you. And so that's a healthy mindset to have.
I had a client once that their main client was Walmart, and Walmart stopped using them as a vendor, and they went under. So clients like, let's say, Walmart are all consuming. So that is the trick, it's because you have to use all your resources. But then if they change their mind or find somebody, I don't know, a few pennies cheaper, then what? Then you have nothing because all you were was one client. So you have to balance it out. Like right now, I had so many different companies looking at so many different products. And I think that's the trick, is that you have to have a lot out there. You can't just create one product and then go to 10, 20 different companies. You just got to have a lot of products and have it in the pipeline.
How about when two companies want you to work on something at the same time? Or
all the time. All the time.
Yeah, one seems fun. Like, you're all locked in and, oh, okay, so you just manage to juggle them, or you just say, look, I'll start it at this point, or?
I work better when I'm working on multiple things. I mean, I guess because I'm a mom of 3. I once had a client ask me if I'm a full-time mom, and I'm like, well, can you be a part-time mom? So...
Good point, yeah.
Yeah, the answer is no. You cannot be a part-time mom. You have to, give it your all. So, obviously, you have to juggle a bunch of different things at once. But I have a very supportive husband, and so if I'm really, really busy, he goes back and forth to DC and different places, but he does work from home certain times. So sometimes we'll juggle it that way. But a lot of times, my kids are a little older, except for my 4-year-old. My other kids are 15 and 11, so that's where they come in handy. Can you watch the 4-year-old? But I'm just quick, so that's bottom line.
Why don't you just go into business for yourself? I mean, it seems like you have all these great contacts, you got all this great experience. Did that ever just appeal to you to just be like, I'm doing this and this is my company?
I've always been really kind of like an independent thinker, and I like to work my own way. So I think at the end of the day, I think that works best for me. Other people are really good within companies and offices and all that. I just like to work weird hours. Sometimes I'll send emails at 5 in the morning or midnight or in the middle of the day. So I work a lot of hours, but just at weird hours. And it helps me also to be able to raise my 3 kids and be there for them. I didn't want to work in-house and miss all of those important things. My kids are my best asset. I love them, and they feed off of my energy, and I feed off of them when it comes to invention. And so I have 2 kids that are actually involved in design. And as I said, my daughter, she's a painter. And my son, he's constantly thinking of ideas. And I think that it's a really unique way of working. And I don't think having kids is a negative. I think it actually adds depth to your concepts.
Well, yeah, it seems like it's good market research if they're bored with it. I mean, there's probably times when...
Great video I did with my 2 of my kids, my 11 and my 4. And I was doing some STEM toys, and I actually bought 2 toys and had them play with it, and I videoed them. And so I learned so much from that. And so watching kids observe, you see how they handle things, problems, the positives, the negatives. I think a lot of times designers or inventors work as an adult within a bubble, and they don't see how kids really relate to things, how they handle things. And I think there's a huge difference sitting in an office with a bunch of adults and being around kids and seeing how they actually, what they love, what they don't love, and things like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. It totally makes sense. Adult can think something's awesome and the kid could be more bored with it. You said that you believe in doing more low-priced toys. Is that, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. But,
no, it's true.
But
it's true.
Why is that? Is it because the future of toys is so competitive that you want to be able to be competitive, or is Is there just a better sweet spot there, or why the low price?
Well, I feel that a lot of toys, especially STEM toys and robots, are way too expensive, and I don't feel that they're accessible for enough kids. My goal, like my passion, is to make toys accessible to all kids, whether or not they're geniuses or on the spectrum. I want to be able to offer toys for every type of kid in every social economic, and I think it's really unfair. I feel like they're catering, a lot of these toys are catering to the rich, really intelligent kid, and I think there just needs to be more accessibility. So while obviously certain things are expensive and pricey, like an iPad, and I totally appreciate that. My son is into Xbox, so I get it. But I feel like when it comes to kids and little kids especially, where they're going to grow so fast and they're going to outgrow a lot of their toys, I think it's so important to really make toys that every mom and every dad could afford and that kids have more availability.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's a shame that, some kids are priced out of being cool or doing what the other kids are doing.
It's really so wrong. I went to buy my son sneakers. I'm like, what do you mean $100 for sneakers? Apparently those are cheap. I cannot believe for a kid who's going to grow. I mean, I remember years ago, I was looking at, I think it was J. Crew cuts, and they were selling a cashmere, onesie. A cashmere onesie. Are you kidding me? Like, the kid's just going to, puke all over it or whatever. and so to me, even if you have the money, I think certain things are just a waste of money. And so certain products might be a little pricey, but they last many years. One of the products that I bought for my 4-year-old, I bought her a Nabi, which is, I think it was $200. She's 4 and she still plays with it. So to me, that's a good investment. But when, they're growing and, you want a toy for a specific age, I feel like to spend so much money, I think these robots I found were $200 and up. And it's just crazy. I mean, it's like, who has the money for all of these things, plus the $100 sneakers?
Wow. Yeah. And of course, kids either want or need something. Oh, I want to thank you for spending your time with me. And I just want to ask one last question. Say you've got an inventor or a toy designer or somebody's created a game or something, and they came to you and asked for advice. Hey, I want to be successful with this. I want to get lots of sales. I want to get it out there to everybody. What advice would you give them?
Well, first thing I would tell any new designer is do not spend money. Do not spend one dime until you actually speak to a professional. The hardest thing is when individuals come over to me and they said, I just spent $10,000 on a patent. Oh. It's like, did you even do your research? Do you even know if it's a good idea? And I'm not saying, spend $10,000 for advice, but there's plenty of inventors that will either for very little money will sit down and go over your idea. I've helped a lot of people for nothing. I'm not saying that's obviously the best form for financial for me, but that's where my heart is. Sometimes I'll say to someone, hey, I'll partner up with you. Let's do it. Let's do 50-50. And I believe in their concept. But I do think that people really need to do two things. Number one, get a real professional opinion before investing. And number two, it's so easy to Google and see what's out there. You don't necessarily need to go to a patent attorney just yet. And even if you go to a patent attorney, the more information you give to a patent attorney, the less it's going to cost you. So if you have pages of similar concepts or, and you find your white space, you find there is nothing like this out there, and then go to a patent attorney for whatever it costs to do a proper search, do that first. Because the last thing you want to do is a product that, it's going to go nowhere and nobody's interested. And maybe there's a reason why nobody's interested.
I think a lot of inventors fear that somebody's going to rip them off by talking to somebody. But I also wanted to ask to the point, and just to follow up, would you always recommend that somebody get a patent, or should they just put it out there on the market and just go for it and see if they can sell it? Because I get a lot of people bogged down in spending lots of money on the patent, and there's no market for it or whatever.
This is the thing. Putting it out there, you definitely risk people ripping you off. And I'm a seasoned designer and inventor, and I still get ripped off. So imagine a person who doesn't know anybody, and they come to a company and they hand their little sketch, or whatever, and maybe inadvertently the company might rip them off. It might be in the back of their head, and you have no recourse. So a lot of times people do NDAs. There's a school philosophy. People say, do not do anything without an NDA, but then other people say it really means nothing. So I guess it matters if you have one concept or if you're looking to do a bunch of different concepts. You can't patent everything. I would be broke if I patented every idea. You have to figure out what's your best idea and maybe focus on that first. But if you have ideas, you can't be scared that someone's going to rip you off. You just have to go with your gut. I'm an honest person, but there's a lot of sketchy people. If people ask for money to look at your concept, I don't know. I would be a little leery of that. Just to look at your concept, I would never ask somebody, give me $800. I'll give you my opinion before I even see it. I would say to them, for me, I would tell them, give me an NDA. I will sign it. I always advise people to do that. And then I will look at it and I will let you know what I think, at least on the onset. If it's something worth pursuing, I will say, hey, I'll work with you or whatever. If it's not something I could do, I'll tell them that too. I'm honest. Not everybody is. So you have to be really, really careful and trust your guts.
You've been listening to episode 39 of the Invention Stories Podcast, our interview with Louise White, a freelance designer inventor at Me First Designs, Inc. And I want to thank Louise for being our guest today. More information can be found at www.mefirstdesigns.com. The Invention Stories Podcast has been sponsored by The Socket Saver. Does the plug fall out of your wall socket while vacuuming, using a power tool, or recharging your electronic devices? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. Please visit www.socketsaver.com. If you're an inventor who would like to be featured on the Invention Stories Podcast, have a suggestion on how we can make this podcast better, or would like to become a sponsor, please contact us at inventionstoriespodcast@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to write a positive review for us on iTunes. More information and show notes can be found at our website, www.inventionstories.com. Thank you very much for listening today, and please tell a friend.